The galaxy had always feared the Zirath Dominion. They were known as the Alpha Race, the strongest species in space, the ones who ruled with no mercy. For centuries they had expanded their empire, crushing every world that dared to resist them. To most beings in the galaxy, the Zirath were untouchable. They had advanced warships, powerful weapons, and endless armies. Many planets had fallen, and no one had ever been able to fight them for long. To the Zirath, this power was natural. They believed no one could ever challenge their place at the top. But far away on a small blue world called Earth, a new chapter was about to begin. On Earth's colony of New Hope, life had been peaceful for many years. Families lived in domes under the bright skies of the planet. Children played near the rivers, and farmers grew crops that fed the growing community. For Captain Daniel Harris, New Hope was more than just another colony. He had been stationed there to oversee defense, but he saw the colony as his home. He loved the wide plains, the smell of fresh soil, and the sense of freedom away from the crowded cities of Earth. Harris was a man of patience and focus, but he knew the peace would not last forever. Humanity was expanding, and it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Lieutenant Megan Brooks was one of the young officers under Harris's command. She was brave, sharp, and unshaken in crisis. Unlike Harris, who had seen war during his early years in Earth's Defense Command, Megan had never fought a true battle. Yet she carried herself with strength, and the colonists trusted her. She often trained them in basic drills, teaching farmers how to hold rifles and miners how to guard supply routes. Many thought of her as more than a soldier. She was a leader who stood among them, a symbol that Earth's people were ready to protect themselves. The Zirath arrived without warning. Their fleet came like a storm across the skies of New Hope. Great warships blocked out the sun, their black metal hulls glowing with blue energy. The first strike hit the colony's outer dome, shattering glass and metal in seconds. Fires raged across the fields and screams filled the air. The Zirath believed this attack would be like all the others, quick, brutal, and final. They expected the humans to surrender or flee, but they did not know who they were facing. Daniel Harris rushed to the command center as alarms blared. The screens showed wave after wave of Zirath ships. He knew their fleet was small compared to Earth's main defense forces, but retreat was not an option. The colonists could not escape in time. Harris gave one simple order: fight back. Megan led squads into the streets, gathering civilians and arming them with whatever weapons they had. Old rifles, mining tools, and even hunting bows were carried into battle. It was a desperate defense, but it was better than surrender. The Zirath troops landed in heavy armored carriers. Their tall frames and thick armor made them look like monsters compared to the humans. They walked through fire and smoke with no fear. But when they expected an easy victory, they were met with something else. Farmers and miners, side by side with soldiers, fired at them from rooftops and alleys. Megan moved through the chaos, shouting orders, pulling civilians to safety, and striking back whenever she had the chance. For the first time in a long while, the Zirath encountered resistance that did not crumble. At the command center, Harris coordinated Earth's defense ships. Small fighters launched from hangars, darting between the massive Zirath cruisers. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but Harris used clever tactics. Instead of facing the Zirath head-on, he ordered his pilots to split apart and attack from many angles. They targeted weak spots, fuel lines, and weapon ports. It was not enough to win, but it slowed the Zirath and bought precious time. In the days that followed, New Hope became a battlefield. Streets turned into trenches and every building became a fortress. The Zirath continued their assault, confident that humans would eventually fall like every other species. But each day the humans fought harder. Each loss only fueled their anger. Harris studied the enemy's movements carefully. He learned how their ships operated, how their soldiers advanced, and where they left openings. Megan kept the civilians united. She refused to let fear break them apart. She reminded them that this was their home and they would not give it up. The Zirath soon noticed something strange. Humans were not like the other species they had conquered. They did not follow the same patterns. When the Zirath adapted, the humans adapted faster. When a soldier survived an ambush, he returned the next day with a new plan. When a group of colonists lost their weapons, they built new ones out of scraps and parts. Children carried messages through tunnels. Old men set traps in the forests, and women stood guard at night with rifles on their shoulders. Humanity refused to bow. Other worlds in the galaxy had whispered about the humans before. They were new to space, still young compared to the ancient empires. Many thought they were reckless, too aggressive, and too unpredictable. But now, as word of New Hope's resistance spread, those whispers became something else. Fear turned into curiosity, and curiosity into hope. Could this small, underestimated race stand against the Alpha? For the Zirath, the thought was laughable. Yet deep inside, a shadow of doubt began to form. Reports came in of losses greater than expected. Squads were vanishing in the forest. Cruisers were damaged by small human ships. Colonists who should have surrendered kept fighting even when defeat seemed certain. The Alphas had never seen this before. They had always won by fear and overwhelming power. But the humans did not fear them. The humans saw the Zirath as just another enemy to overcome. Harris knew the cost was high. He saw his men fall, he heard the cries of families losing loved ones, and he carried the weight of every casualty. Yet he never wavered. He told his people that survival was not enough. They had to fight until the Zirath understood that humanity was not weak. Megan believed the same. She stood at the front lines each day, her uniform torn, her face streaked with ash but her eyes burning with determination. She was no longer just a lieutenant. To the people of New Hope, she had become their shield. The first part of the war was not about victory. It was about proving a point. The Zirath wanted to crush another world, but instead they awakened a fire they could not control. On New Hope, the humans showed what they were made of. They were not the most advanced species. They did not have the largest fleet, but they had something stronger: the will to fight, the courage to endure, and the refusal to surrender. In those first days of battle, a message was written in fire and blood across the skies of New Hope. The Alphas had met humanity, and nothing would ever be the same again. The colony of New Hope had survived the first storm of the Zirath attack, but the war was far from over. Fires still burned in the ruins of the outer dome, and smoke rose into the sky like dark scars across the planet. Families grieved for their loved ones, yet even in their grief they prepared for what was to come. They had learned in those first days that the Zirath could be hurt, and that truth gave them strength. The humans of New Hope refused to surrender, and now they prepared for the next stage of resistance. Captain Daniel Harris walked through the command center, his face tired but steady. Every screen showed reports of damage, casualties, and enemy movements. He listened carefully to each officer, giving quiet orders and adjusting the defense plans. His mind was sharp even as his body ached from sleepless nights. Harris knew the Zirath would not stop until the colony was erased. That meant every hour was important. They had to fight smart, not just hard. Lieutenant Megan Brooks was in the streets working among the people. She moved from shelter to shelter, speaking to families and training groups of civilians. She showed them how to use rifles, how to set traps, and how to move silently through the ruins. The colonists respected her because she did not stand above them. She fought beside them, ate the same food, and slept on the same cold floors. To many, Megan was more than an officer. She was hope given a human face. The Zirath mocked the resistance. They called humans insects trying to fight giants. Their commanders sent messages promising that surrender would mean mercy, while resistance would mean destruction. But the humans ignored those words. They knew the truth. The Zirath never showed mercy, and surrender only led to slavery or death. Harris gathered his officers and told them clearly, humanity would never kneel. Small battles broke out across New Hope each day. Zirath soldiers moved through the forests hunting for hiding places, but they found themselves ambushed by farmers who knew every hill and every tree. Colonists used the land as their weapon. They dug pits, laid wires, and set off explosives made from mining fuel. When the Zirath advanced, the ground itself seemed to fight back. Megan led many of these ambushes. She was always at the front, showing the colonists that courage could overcome fear. In space, Harris used his fleet to harass the larger Zirath cruisers. The human ships were small and light, but that made them fast. They darted in and out like wolves attacking a lion. Harris ordered hit-and-run attacks on supply ships, fuel carriers, and communication relays. The damage was never enough to destroy the entire fleet, but it forced the Zirath to stretch their forces thinner. Every strike gave New Hope more time to recover and rebuild. The humans also began to learn. Every battle taught them something new about their enemy. Harris noticed that the Zirath relied too much on their heavy armor and brute strength. Their soldiers expected fear to break their enemies. But when fear did not work, the Zirath became slower to adapt. Humans, on the other hand, changed quickly. They tested new weapons, tried new formations, and passed knowledge from one group to another. A miner with no training one week could become a clever fighter the next. The Zirath commanders grew frustrated. They had faced many species before, but none had resisted like this. The humans were not the strongest and they were not the most advanced, yet they fought with a spirit that seemed endless. Reports showed that even children carried messages through battle zones and elderly men built barricades in the streets. Every human, no matter how young or old, became part of the resistance. As days turned into weeks, the legend of New Hope spread across the stars. Traders whispered the story in hidden markets. Captives of the Zirath shared it with other oppressed worlds. For the first time in centuries, other species began to wonder if the Alphas could be defeated. They heard about Captain Harris and his fleet that fought like hunters, and about Megan Brooks who stood like a wall between the enemy and her people. They heard about colonists who turned farms into fortresses and miners who destroyed armored soldiers with traps made of simple tools. The story gave them courage. Inside the Zirath fleet, doubt began to grow. Soldiers who once thought of themselves as unstoppable now spoke in hushed tones about the humans. They called them stubborn, reckless, and dangerous. Their commanders punished such talk, but fear spread anyway. Fear that the Alpha race had finally met an enemy that did not bow. Harris felt the pressure building. Supplies were low and every victory came with heavy losses. He could not let the colonists lose hope. He walked through the streets each night speaking to the people, promising that their fight mattered. Megan did the same, though in her own way. She fought alongside the people, showing them through action that the battle was not hopeless. Together they kept the spirit of New Hope alive. The Zirath did not give up. They sent more troops, more ships, and more firepower. They believed that eventually the humans would break. But instead of breaking, the resistance grew stronger. Every new attack taught them more, and every new loss hardened their resolve. The humans had learned something vital. The Zirath could bleed, and if they could bleed, they could be beaten. The spark of resistance had become a fire. And though New Hope was only one colony, the flames of defiance had spread far beyond its skies. Across the galaxy, eyes turned toward the humans. The Alphas had ruled for too long, but now a new voice was rising. A voice that refused to surrender. A voice that said no empire was eternal. Humanity was not finished. Humanity was only beginning. The war for New Hope had changed everything. The Zirath had expected a short campaign, but weeks had passed, and the humans were still standing. They were not only standing, they were striking back with greater force every day. To the Zirath it was unthinkable. To the humans it was survival. Every loss only made them fight harder. Every attack taught them something new. Humanity was becoming stronger, and now the rest of the galaxy was starting to notice. Captain Daniel Harris studied the reports inside the command center. His fleet was still small, but they had gained victories no one thought possible. Harris had ordered daring raids against Zirath supply convoys. His pilots used small, fast ships with new tactics. Instead of direct battle, they darted in and out, hitting weak spots and escaping before the enemy could react. The Zirath lost fuel, food, and weapons. Their mighty fleets were being slowed by an enemy they thought was beneath them. Harris knew these victories were not enough to win the war, but they proved something important. The Alpha could be hurt. On the surface of New Hope, Lieutenant Megan Brooks continued to lead the ground forces. She had turned farmers into soldiers and villages into fortresses. Her unit set traps in the forests, ambushed patrols, and destroyed armored transports. Megan was not the kind of officer who gave orders from behind a desk. She was always in the fight, moving through smoke and fire, leading by example. The colonists followed her because she fought with them, not above them. To them, Megan had become a hero, though she never called herself one. But the humans knew they needed more than bravery. They needed better weapons. Earth's scientists worked day and night to develop something that could truly match the Zirath technology. Dr. Laura Mitchell, a brilliant physicist, led a project deep inside a hidden lab. She and her team studied captured Zirath parts and combined them with human designs. What they created was a weapon unlike anything the Zirath had faced before. It was a railgun, a cannon that used magnetic force to launch projectiles at incredible speed. The test of the first railgun shook the ground like thunder. The projectile ripped through metal thicker than any Zirath armor and turned a target ship into burning wreckage. Humanity had finally found a weapon that could stand against the Alpha. Harris wasted no time. He ordered railguns mounted on Earth's defense ships. The first battle where they were used became a turning point. A human ship, smaller and weaker than its enemy, fired a railgun shot that pierced straight through a Zirath cruiser. The ship exploded in flames and the rest of the fleet fell into chaos. The humans cheered, their spirits lifted higher than ever before. The Zirath, for the first time in centuries, felt fear. Megan and her forces also received new weapons. Portable railguns were developed, smaller but still powerful enough to destroy Zirath walkers and heavy armor. Megan's troops carried them into battle, turning the tide on the ground, where once humans had fought with old rifles and traps. Now they had weapons that could match their enemies' might. The forests and mountains of New Hope became deadly battlegrounds where the Zirath could no longer move freely. The galaxy watched in shock. News of the railgun spread quickly. Species that had lived in fear of the Alphas for generations whispered of hope. If the humans could fight back, maybe others could too. Rebellions began to spark on distant worlds. Small uprisings that once would have been crushed now lasted longer, inspired by the courage of humanity. The myth of the Alpha race was breaking. Inside the Zirath Dominion, leaders grew angry and desperate. They sent larger fleets and stronger armies. They ordered their soldiers to destroy the humans completely. But the harder they tried, the more they revealed their weakness. Their strength had always come from fear. Without fear, their enemies fought harder. Without fear, their power began to crack. And the humans, who had never feared them, tore deeper into their pride. Harris used the railgun fleet with deadly skill. He knew every victory mattered, not only for survival, but for the message it sent. He told his pilots that they were not just fighting for Earth, but for every world that had been crushed by the Alphas. Each shot of the railgun was not just a weapon. It was a declaration that humanity was no longer prey. Humanity was now the predator. Megan's battles on the ground grew fiercer. She led attacks that destroyed entire Zirath camps. Her troops struck supply depots, captured weapons, and rescued prisoners. Each success made the humans stronger and the Zirath weaker. Megan fought with unshakable will. Even when her own body was bruised and her spirit tired, she could not stop because she knew the people of New Hope looked to her for strength. And she refused to let them down. Dr. Mitchell continued her work, improving the railguns and developing new technology. She knew that science was humanity's greatest weapon, the tool that allowed them to overcome stronger foes. She often said, "The Zirath may think they are the Alpha, but they cannot stop human imagination." Her words spread across the colony, giving hope to those who feared the future. As battles raged across space and land, the Zirath began to understand something terrible. The humans were not just resisting. They were growing stronger with every fight. What was supposed to be a simple conquest had turned into a nightmare. Every soldier they killed was replaced by two more. Every weapon they destroyed was rebuilt in a better form. And every attempt to crush the humans only made them more determined. The humans had unleashed something the Zirath had never faced before, the unstoppable spirit of survival. Harris, Megan, and Dr. Mitchell were the leaders of this spirit, but it lived in every man, woman, and child of New Hope. The miners who set traps, the farmers who carried rifles, the children who carried messages, all of them were part of the fight. Humanity was no longer a colony fighting for survival. Humanity had become a force that could shake the galaxy. By the end of that stage of the war, the Zirath had lost more than ships and soldiers. They had lost their image of being untouchable. The Alphas were no longer seen as invincible. They had been wounded by a species they once ignored. And in that wound, the seeds of their downfall had been planted. The humans were rising, and nothing could stop them now. The war had spread far beyond New Hope. What began as a single colony's desperate fight was now shaking the Zirath Dominion across the stars. Humanity's victories had shown the galaxy that the so-called Alpha race could bleed, and that truth was more powerful than any weapon. But the war was not over. In fact, the Zirath were preparing their largest campaign yet. They wanted to erase humanity completely, and they would not rest until Earth itself was under their heel. But Captain Daniel Harris, Lieutenant Megan Brooks, and Dr. Laura Mitchell had no plans to let that happen. The Zirath sent more fleets, larger and stronger than any before. Entire armadas moved toward human space, determined to crush this new threat once and for all. On New Hope, Harris received the reports with calm focus. His officers looked at him for guidance, and he gave them the same answer every time. They would fight. Humanity had railguns now, and with them, they had a weapon that could strike fear into the enemy. Harris began to plan something bold. Instead of waiting for the Zirath to come to them, he would take the fight into their territory. It was a dangerous idea, but Harris knew the Zirath would never expect it. For centuries, no one had dared to attack their home systems. The thought alone was madness. But humanity had already done the impossible. Harris gathered his fleet, every ship that could fight, and prepared for a daring raid into the heart of the Dominion. The mission was clear: cripple their shipyards and force them to retreat. Megan Brooks led the ground forces in a series of liberation campaigns. With portable railguns and new tactics, her troops struck world after world. Planets that had once been chained under Zirath rule suddenly saw human ships in orbit and human soldiers on their soil. Megan fought side by side with her people, leading charges, setting traps, and turning every battlefield into a lesson the Zirath would never forget. She freed entire cities, raising the human flag where once the Zirath banners had flown. The more she fought, the more she became a symbol of freedom. The oppressed species of the galaxy began whispering her name like a legend. Dr. Mitchell continued her work tirelessly. She pushed the railgun project even further, creating new versions that could fire faster, hit harder, and be mounted on smaller ships. She studied captured Zirath technology and turned it against them. Shields that once protected their cruisers now failed under her new weapons. Mitchell was not a soldier, but her mind was as sharp as any blade. She often said that science was her battlefield, and every breakthrough was another strike against the Alphas. The raid into Zirath territory was one of the boldest moves in human history. Harris's fleet moved silently through hidden routes, dodging patrols and cloaking their signals. They arrived at one of the largest shipyards in the Dominion, a place where hundreds of warships were built each year. The Zirath never imagined anyone would dare attack it. But Harris dared. His fleet opened fire with railguns, and the first shots ripped through the heart of the shipyard. Explosions tore across the station, ships under construction burned, and workers fled in panic. By the time the Zirath realized what was happening, the humans were already gone. They left behind ruins and fear. For the first time in centuries, the Alphas had been struck in their own home. The news spread like wildfire. Entire species cheered in secret. The galaxy had seen many rebellions before, but never like this. Never had anyone taken the fight to the Dominion itself. The humans had done what others thought impossible. And more than that, they had shown that courage and creativity could defeat fear and power. The Zirath grew desperate. Their leaders shouted that humanity must be destroyed at any cost. They poured more fleets into the war, stretching their forces thinner and thinner. They tried to crush uprisings on other worlds, but the flames of rebellion were spreading faster than they could control. Harris's raid had been more than an attack. It had been a signal that the age of the Alphas was ending. On the ground, Megan continued to strike. She fought in deserts, forests, and frozen tundras. Each battle pushed the Zirath back a little more. She saw the faces of liberated people, their tears of joy, their voices shouting for freedom. Those moments gave her strength even when she was exhausted. She knew the war was bigger than just humanity now. It was about giving hope to the entire galaxy. Harris pushed his fleet harder, knowing that the final battle was coming. He told his crew that they had to be ready for the worst fight of their lives. The Zirath would not fall quietly. They would throw everything they had into one last attempt to destroy humanity. Harris stood firm. He told his people that they would meet the enemy head-on and show them that humanity would never bow. Dr. Mitchell prepared new weapons for that final battle. Her railguns were stronger than ever. She had even begun to design new energy systems that could outlast the Zirath reactors. Every test brought humanity closer to matching their enemy's technology. Mitchell knew the coming fight would be terrible, but she believed with all her heart that humans could win. Not because of their weapons alone, but because of their will. The breaking point of the war had arrived. The Zirath were bleeding from 1,000 wounds, their fleet stretched thin, their pride shattered. The humans, once considered weak and primitive, were now leading the charge against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a battle that would decide the fate of both species. Harris, Megan, and Mitchell stood at the center of it all, ready to carry humanity into the fire one last time. The galaxy had reached a moment of decision. The Zirath Dominion, once feared by every world, was bleeding from countless battles. They had been called the Alpha race for centuries, but now their enemies saw them as wounded and desperate. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had stood against the Alphas and struck back with such force that the Dominion was crumbling. But the war was not yet finished. The final battle was coming, and it would decide the future of the stars. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of the Liberty, the flagship of humanity's fleet. Around him, officers worked at their stations, their faces showing both fear and determination. They all knew what was at stake. The Zirath had gathered their last and greatest fleet near their capital world. Thousands of ships filled the skies, armed with weapons meant to destroy humanity once and for all. Harris looked at the stars on the screen, and he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He knew this was the moment everything had been leading to. Lieutenant Megan Brooks prepared her ground forces for the assault. She had fought in forests, deserts, and frozen tundras. But this would be unlike any battle before. The Zirath capital was a world of iron cities and massive fortresses. Every street was guarded, every tower bristled with weapons. Megan knew many would not return, but she also knew there was no turning back. She walked among her soldiers, speaking to them in quiet, steady words. She told them that they were not just fighting for Earth or for New Hope. They were fighting for every world that had suffered under the Dominion. Her soldiers nodded, their faces set with grim resolve. They trusted her, and she would not let them down. Dr. Laura Mitchell stood in her laboratory aboard one of the fleet's science vessels. She had worked without rest for weeks, pushing human technology further than anyone thought possible. The railguns were now faster, stronger, and more precise. She had even created new energy systems that allowed human ships to fight longer than ever before. Mitchell knew the final battle would test everything she had built. She whispered to herself that science was her weapon, and she prayed it would be enough. The fleets met above the Zirath capital in a storm of fire and metal. The sky lit up with explosions as railguns tore through enemy ships and Zirath weapons struck back with brutal force. Harris stood firm, giving calm orders even as the Liberty shook under enemy fire. His ships moved like hunters, striking from unexpected angles, piercing the armor of the mighty Zirath cruisers. Every time a railgun shot cut through an enemy ship, cheers filled the human vessels. But Harris knew there was no time to celebrate. The battle was too large and the enemy was too strong to be beaten easily. On the ground, Megan led the assault with fearless energy. She charged through ruined streets, railgun in hand, shouting for her troops to follow. They fought building by building, tearing down the defenses that had stood for centuries. Zirath soldiers met them with fury, but the humans refused to break. Megan saw men and women fall, but she pressed forward, knowing that every step brought them closer to victory. The people of the galaxy would remember this battle for generations, and she would not let fear steal it from them. Dr. Mitchell's work proved to be the turning point. Her new systems allowed the human fleet to outlast the Zirath. While enemy ships burned through their fuel and power, the human vessels kept fighting. One by one, the Zirath ships began to falter. Harris seized the moment, ordering his fleet to push forward. Railguns fired in waves, cutting through the enemy line. The once proud armada of the Alphas began to collapse. On the surface, Megan's forces reached the central fortress of the capital. The building was massive, built to intimidate all who saw it. But Megan did not hesitate. She led her soldiers straight through its gates, fighting room by room until they reached the heart of the Zirath command. There, the leaders of the Dominion stood, furious and afraid. They shouted that they were the Alpha, that no one could erase them. But Megan looked them in the eyes and said that their time was over. The battle ended not with a single shot, but with the silence of the Alphas realizing their reign had come to an end. When the smoke cleared, the Zirath Dominion was no more. Their fleets were shattered, their armies broken, and their leaders defeated. The galaxy stood in shock. Worlds that had lived in fear for centuries now saw the Alphas erased from existence. Humanity had done it. They had risen from a single colony under attack to the saviors of countless species. On the Liberty, Harris looked out at the stars. He felt the exhaustion of every battle, but also the pride of knowing what his people had accomplished. He knew humanity's journey was not finished. The galaxy would not suddenly become peaceful, and new challenges would come. But he also knew that humanity had proven itself. They were no longer seen as weak or primitive. They had earned their place among the stars. Megan stood with her soldiers on the surface of the liberated capital. She thought of the people of New Hope, of the miners and farmers who had first taken up arms. She thought of the faces of those who had fallen along the way. She whispered a promise that their sacrifices would never be forgotten. The galaxy would remember that it was humans who refused to bow, humans who fought when no one else would, and humans who brought down the Alpha. Dr. Mitchell looked at her machines and smiled through her tears. She had given everything she had to the fight, and in the end it had been enough. She knew her work would continue, not for war but for peace. She dreamed of using her science to build a better galaxy, one where no empire could ever rise to crush the weak again. The war was over, the Alphas were gone, and in their place stood humanity, stronger than ever. The galaxy would forever remember the day when the humans erased the Alpha from existence. They were no longer the prey. They were no longer the underdogs. They were the ones who had fought the impossible fight and won. And as the stars shone above them, humanity stepped into a new future, ready for whatever came next.